Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever event of the Junior Economic Club of the UAE. Our today's speaker is an excellent computer scientist, a debater, and a superb artist. So without further ado, I'd like to present an incoming freshman at MIT, Diptasri Gupta.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Vedant said, obviously, I graduated from high school this year, and I'm going to be an incoming freshman at MIT next year. And throughout the college admissions process, I had a lot of interests and I had a lot of dreams and hopes for where I wanted to end up. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about how to do that in a way, in a way in which you remain like faithful to yourself and what you're interested in, and how to get good college admissions results at the end of it. So what I'm going to start by talking about is what makes a good university applicant. And all of these statements are probably things that you've kind of heard before. And they're things that are thrown around whenever people are talking about college, but a lot of you might not know what that means. Like, what does it mean to be a good student? What does it mean to show sustained commitment? So I'm going to go through each of these points and kind of tell you what they meant to me and how I try to emulate each of these. So good student is kind of self-explanatory. Like when you're applying to college, you want to stay focused on school and want to stay focused on your grades and try to be engaged in what you're learning with. The next one is a unique interest. Now, I think this is kind of important, especially for international students to have, because when you're applying to college, a lot of the applicants that colleges see kind of fit the same mold. So if you have a unique interest or anything that you're interested in that you think that they might not see that often, that'll be really useful. I'll talk about what my unique interest was and how you can cultivate one a little bit later. The next thing is sustained commitment, because a lot of students kind of decide in their last year of college or their last couple of years of college that they want to apply to university, and they start doing a lot of activities really fast. But what is more impressive is having one thing that you've done for 4 years rather than 4 things that you've done for 1 year, because it kind of shows a certain genuineness, a certain sincerity that you can't really fake. You know, you like, unless you started thinking about college in grade 9. Like sustained commitment kind of really shows colleges that you have interests outside of just applying to college. The next thing is genuine depth. I think this is really important because a lot of people, especially these days, think that the college admissions process is something that you can kind of gamify and that you can tick boxes and that'll get you into college. But if you take the time in investing in what you're really interested in, not what you think will look good, I think that really pays off. So that's what I mean by genuine depth. The last point I'll talk about is interesting life stories. So you see a lot of college admissions essays talking about unusual circumstances that children have come from, or just unique circumstances that they've had in their life. Now, a lot of the people on this call will be living in Dubai. We've kind of had privileged backgrounds. We don't really have troubled or, difficult upbringings in any way. And I would say that that doesn't matter. Like, you can stay away from that, and please don't try to take one small difficulty in your life and turn it into something it's not if it hasn't really affected you in any way. I think a life story can be interesting if you try to make it interesting, and even your intellectual journey, getting interested in a subject, that can make for an interesting life story if you present it correctly. Now, I'm going to talk about kind of what made me stand out, and immediately you'll see 2 separate categories. Now, I said I had a lot of interests, and I did, but I kind of really early on decided what interests were my primary interests, which you see on the left, and what were my secondary interests. So I'll talk about my primary interests first. I'm really passionate about education and kind of the art of pedagogy, which is teaching children. And I've done a lot of work with that. And it's something that interested me even when I was kind of moving through the secondary school. I would always kind of, when I learned a new skill, I'd want to teach other people. So I realized this in high school. And I thought that I could kind of leverage this in some way, turn this into a bigger component of my application, because I think a lot of children try to do philanthropy when they're in high school, and that didn't really feel natural for me, because although I cared a lot about a lot of causes, there wasn't one that I really wanted to put my all of my force behind. But education is something that benefits the community, and it was something that I genuinely liked, so I decided to do that. The next thing I was interested in is animation and art. I'm going to talk a little bit more about animation and art later on in this presentation, but I took GCSE art. I've been very interested in art, both art and animation, throughout my time at school. And I did a few projects that you wouldn't necessarily expect from an MIT student throughout my time at high school. And I think that really helped me make my application stand out. The last one, because I'm applying for computer science in college, is technology. I'm interested in computer science, even though I didn't take it at A level. I've done a lot of online courses. I've done a lot of internships, independent coding projects. So it kind of made a natural primary component of my application. Apart from that, music, I've played both the piano and the violin for about a decade now. And I've kind of done all of the music exams. I got to grade 8 on the piano, grade 7 on the violin. The next thing I did was speaking, World Scholars Cup, and economics, which I kind of talk about why I lumped these all together. But I've been doing debating for a long time, and World Scholars Cup as well. This actually I turned into a bigger component of my application, because I founded the World Scholars Cup at school and kind of ran that for a couple of years, because we came quite high in the World Scholars Cup, and I thought I could use that to to teach other people how to do the World Scholars Cup, which again links into the teaching thing I did, because I taught them sessions. The last thing in this category is economics. So I did economics essay competitions, and I was head of the economics club at school. So I did kind of various economics things in my time at high school. The next thing is dance. I did Indian classical dance for 11 years. I quit last year, and I actually thought that was a very powerful component of my application, even though it was a small component. So a lot of colleges ask you to write a mini essay about an activity you've done. I spent a lot of my major essays talking about these, so I decided to bring dance in to my little essay about what activity I did, because it's kind of how I showed I've stayed connected with my culture. And again, it shows sustained commitment that I've done something for a decade, and that I didn't just do it for college applications. And I had a lot of things I wanted to say about Indian dance, and I had a lot of insight I wanted to provide. So I wrote my essay about that. The last thing that made me stand out, which might be a little bit funny, is standardized testing. So I kind of figured out when I was taking the SAT that I was kind of good at the multiple choice kind of tests. So I decided to really capitalize on that and take as many tests as I could. So I took the SAT, I took a few subject tests, I took a few APs, and I filled my time with that. I realized that this might not be feasible anymore because of coronavirus, and a lot of you have had your testing canceled, but that's why I said it's not feasible anymore. But because more schools are becoming test optional, and there's generally going to be less emphasis on standardized testing in the years to come anyway, this doesn't really matter. But it was just something that I was good at, so I decided to do that. So now these are more specific examples of what I talked about what made me stand out. So I was really interested in computer hardware and things like that, and I built a lot of small things in my free time. But this is something more larger scale that I did. I basically soldered 200 LEDs together and coded into them to make a kind of playable game of Tetris. And this took a lot of time. This took many, many hours. And it was something I did entirely on my own. And it was a bit of a pain because to source these materials in the UAE was not easy. But it's something I did. And it's something that I think showed a lot of commitment. I think this was one of the strongest things I put on my application, actually. And I really enjoyed the process of doing this. I'm controlling it with a remote, by the way. Yeah. I really enjoyed the process of doing this, and I think that it was a very strong component of my application. And I documented it correctly. I kind of took pictures of everything, and I ended up putting it in a portfolio, which I'll talk more about. But this is kind of what I did to show the technological aspect of myself. The next thing I want to show you examples of is my art portfolio. So I said I had a genuine interest in art, but I hadn't really done any extracurriculars related to art except for the GCSE in art. But it's something that I still wanted to show off because I had invested a lot of time and effort into it. So the perfect way to do that is with an art portfolio. There's a lot of anxiety surrounding portfolios in general. Like, people say that if you're not amazing, don't send in a portfolio. And I had a lot of anxiety about that. But I spoke to the art teacher at my school, who happens to be the US college admissions counselor. And he said that my art was good enough. So if you can get an outside opinion as to whether your art or your music or your dance is good enough to put in a portfolio, I think that's really helpful, especially with someone that oversees portfolios in general, or someone that knows what they're talking about. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, and I submitted an art portfolio to a few colleges. And again, it's something I think made me stand out. The next thing I did was this app I created for dyslexic students. So back, I think a year ago, I read this book called The Mind's Eye by Thomas G. West. I would highly recommend it. It was kind of a book that talked about how dyslexic students obviously perceive the world very differently to regular people. They perceive the world in a very visual way. And then he kind of, this book was written in the 90s, by the way, and he was talking about how the technological revolution would bring about a fundamental change in the way dyslexic students were taught. So there'd be a lot more visualizations, there'd be a lot more visual aids for them to kind of conceptualize difficult subjects that they naturally find difficult. And I kind of looked on the internet, and I couldn't really find anything that specifically kind of filled this gap. There weren't really resources that taught dyslexic students in a very visual way. So I decided to create one. This actually combined my interests of education and technology, and a little bit of animation as well. Actually, a lot of animation, because I created custom animations for this app. That's what this app actually housed. It was about 7 animations about different maths topics. So this is what the app kind of looked like. I took a video of the UI as it was on my computer, but obviously you could put this on a phone as well. And I'm looking to put this on the App Store soon, but I haven't actually ended up putting it on the App Store, but I did document it and put it in a portfolio. So these are a couple of the videos, as you can see. I'm gonna mute this. Yeah, it's muted. So you don't actually have to listen, but there's a voiceover over this. I kind of hired a voice artist on Fiverr to help me. But this is kind of just a compilation of like little animations I did to visualize maths concepts. This was about
Dippy, I think we're having some technical difficulties. We're not being able to hear you.
compilation of clips from all of the videos. But yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about what I did to prepare, apart from all of my interests throughout high school. So these are kind of like really self-explanatory. There's nothing new I can add to the conversation. You've heard this many times before, but I formed good relationships with 2 or 3 teachers because you do need recommendations. There's a lot of debate around how much recommendations actually matter, but it doesn't take that much extra effort. And if it does matter, if it's the tipping point, then it'll help you. The next thing I did was I did internships. A lot of you will kind of be deciding what to do with your summers. Obviously, this summer with coronavirus, it's slightly more limited, but actually I was thinking about it. A lot of the things I did were things that you could do during coronavirus. So like one of my internships was online. So I was able to do an internship in Dubai and do another internship online simultaneously. So if any of you guys can find online internships, that'll be really helpful. But even doing stuff by yourself at home is way better than doing nothing, especially because all of the applicants are going through this and none of them will really have fancy summer programs or in-house internships to put on their resumes anyway. The next thing I did well in school and standardized tests. I've already talked about standardized tests, but a lot of people stop focusing on school, especially if they're applying to the US. But you have to keep your grades up. Like there's no avoiding that. You have to kind of keep working at school, even if you view your college applications as primary and your schoolwork is secondary. Like you have to do it. The fourth thing I did was I pared down my activities. So in primary school and kind of before year 11, year 12, I was the kind of person that did a lot of activities. And when I went to sixth form, I kind of realized I wouldn't be able to keep all of it up and do all of them to a very good, level of depth. So I kind of pared down my activities, and I'll kind of explain how to do that later on in the presentation. But I kind of narrowed my focus to 2 or 3 things I really cared about. And obviously I did my personal projects, which you've already seen on the side. And I've put a couple of logos here that some of you might be familiar with or might familiarize yourself with in the coming years. Like these logos will kind of haunt you. The next thing I want to talk about is my Common App essay. So the first thing a lot of you will have to decide when doing your Common App essay is you will have to kind of decide whether you're doing a resume essay versus a non-resume essay. So a resume essay is an essay that primarily focuses on something that you've done. And a non-resume essay might be something about your background, a personal exploration, just kind of talking about you, who you are as a person and your life. So now this is a personal preference, but I decided to do a non-resume essay because I feel like everything I wanted to get out about my resume, I did on the activity section of my Common App. So I kind of wanted to showcase my writing skills and what I'd kind of been thinking about and what I'd thought about. Kind of about animation, which is, an art form that I really care about, but I'll talk about that later. The next thing you have to decide on is a topic. Now, you can be kind of strategic. If you're doing a non-resume essay, you can be strategic about your topic because I chose animation, but it still kind of links in with a lot of things that I did put on my resume. But I didn't talk about anything that I put on my resume at all. I spoke about my relationship with the art form and how I was kind of a pretentious child and I didn't think animation was a highbrow enough art form or a way to express myself, but I kind of realized through watching Disney movies the depth and complexity behind them and how I started to do them more and how I started to get a very intuitive understanding of even STEM subjects as I did animation. So the next thing you want to talk about is style. And I decided to make mine kind of introspective, but still a little bit lighthearted. I did put a couple of jokes in, but since I was talking about me and an art form, I think that lent itself really well to an introspective kind of pondering style. The last tip I would say is don't be afraid to make it quirky. So a lot of people, especially depending on what kind of colleges you're applying to, feel the need to make their essays super highbrow. And I would say like, if those aren't where your interests lie, then you don't have to. You don't have to kind of talk about topics that you think they will want to hear about. Like, sure, if you read kind of Tolstoy and Dostoevsky in your spare time, like sure, talk about that. But my essay was kind of how I kind of went away from that and how I realized that other art forms had merit. So I think that's why I think my essay was successful. I did speak about something related to my resume. It was something that you wouldn't really see often, and especially not for a STEM major. And it was a personal quest. So it talked about my growth and a belief that I had that I kind of overturned. This is an essay that it wasn't actually my Common App essay, but I did this for a lot of my essays. I would kind of brainstorm on paper and write down a lot of the sentences I wanted to say or like basic points I wanted to cover on paper. And then my last step of the process was actually putting it down in a word processor. This isn't my Common App essay, but this was another essay. It was an essay I wrote about the witching hour, which Roald Dahl spoke about in the BFG. I was a big fan of writing essays about children's media, but yeah, I did that. So basically you don't have to, talk about quote unquote intellectual topics to make it an intellectual essay is what I want to say. The next thing I want to talk about is just tips and tricks. The first thing I'd say is get everything down on paper. every activity that you want to do or you're thinking about doing, everything that you have to do, everything you're planning to do, just do it on paper. Like, have a specific designated place where you keep all of your plans in place, because I'm sure you've heard this from like many people, but you're way more likely to do things if you actually write it down. And this was something I did not do, and I started to do it when I was applying to college. So like, I'd write down what essays I had to write, what essays I had yet to write, and I kept track of it. I was very organized while I was applying to college. But if I did that before, I think I would have been able to do a lot more. The next thing I would say is plan out your activities. So a lot of people kind of get into the habit of like, oh, this thing looks cool, I'm going to do that, and then they drop it after 2 months when they see something else, and they're like, oh, that looks cool, I'm going to do that. I would say at least in the next 3 months, you should really be planning out what you're going to do for college and kind of lock down what you're doing. Obviously, if something amazing presents itself, you shouldn't say no to it, but try to have blinders on when you're applying to college, because you'll drive yourself crazy, because there's so many opportunities out there. You have to pick some. So when you pick some, stick to your guns. The next thing I want to say is, don't get overly fixated on standardized testing, which is what I did. So I did the SAT in October of year 12, and I got a score that was highly acceptable by everyone's standards, but it wasn't a 1600. So I decided very stupidly to do it again in December. And I did improve my score, but that was really not necessary. Like, everyone says this, as long as you get above a certain threshold, depending on what universities you're applying to, that threshold will be different. But everyone says this: after you get above a certain score, stop worrying about it. I did not listen. And a lot of you will not listen, no matter how many times you hear about it. But speaking from personal experience, I have friends that got a 36 on the ACT, which is a full score, and they got rejected from almost every college they applied to. Similarly, I had friends that were really, really worried about their SAT score because they didn't get very high, but they ended up getting into into many of the top colleges. So standardized testing is important, and you should care about it. But once you get above a certain threshold, and there's no magic number as to what threshold, what score that is, but I think that if everyone around you is telling you that score is fine, that score is probably fine, and you should just focus your time and energy on other things that matter. Now, the next thing I wanted to talk about is something that a lot of you might be wondering right now. So COVID is happening, I'm stuck at home, how do I build a CV? As I said, a lot of the things I did were actually, I did them while sitting at home. And they didn't require that much interaction with the world. And even if your application is based on stuff that requires interaction with the world, this Zoom call is kind of proof that you can do things that involve other people while still staying home and kind of staying safe. So what I would say is, number one, especially if you're kind of a STEM major, or you want to do things, you want to apply for something that requires you building with your hands, personal projects are the way to go. I did a lot of personal projects, as you saw. There's another one here. This is kind of like a little binary counter, which I kind of taught year 9s how to make, but I built it myself before. It shows the number on the screen, and the LEDs kind of show the corresponding number in binary if you flip it over on its side. So I did a lot of personal projects. And then the next thing you can do is blogs. So everyone and their mother will have a blog while applying to college. It's kind of a cliche. A lot of people kind of start blogs in their last year of school. But if you're still entering your last 2 years of school, starting a blog now would be perfect, because again, it shows sustained commitment, and all blogs are not created equal. If you have a good blog, that's way better than someone who just posted 2 things on a blog and says they have a blog, because they do check your blogs, admissions officers. So if you can make your blog have depth and look nice, that will really help you. I didn't have a blog personally, but I have a couple friends who did, and they again got into top universities. The next thing that you can do is online internships. So something that I think that a lot of people can leverage right now is, a lot of important people are sitting at home right now with nothing to do. So cold emailing will work a lot more now than it would pre-COVID. So if you just, I'll tell you a story about this actually. One of my friends got the Deputy General of the United Nations to back their MUN, which is ridiculous and crazy just because she emailed. And not the Deputy General, sorry, the SecGen of the UN. And basically, like, what I'm trying to say is a lot of important people will have nothing to do right now. So if you want an internship, you can absolutely go and get it just by cold emailing or using kind of if a lot of you are in Dubai College, you can use the DC alumni networks or the alumni networks of your respective schools. One thing I will say about these is they will be extremely boring and they will try to make you do as little as possible. And it is up to you to make them interesting. So I'll give you an example. In my online internship, they basically asked me to create a sentiment analyzer, which basically analyzes the emotion within a piece of text. And they basically wanted me to take a prepackaged bit of code and just kind of run it on text that they've already done, which like a monkey could do. It's not very impressive. So what I did is I did that and I gave them what they wanted, but I also created my own. So this is a naive Bayes classifier that I made. So I actually coded my own sentiment analyzer. And so like you can do your own things and make it more complex so it sounds better and it makes for a better resume, even if they're not giving you much to do. And this is from another internship I did. And let me tell you, they gave me nothing to do. They gave me one data set to play around with. And I basically made my own internship and I gave myself to do it. I made graphs and I just kind of messed around with. And that's what you'll have to do a lot of the time because you will be sitting around, but at least you're sitting around at home and not sitting around at an internship, which is the benefit to an online internship. The next thing you can do is essays. This is something that, this is only if you're a rising junior. So, this should say rising senior, actually. You're a junior right now and you're going to be a senior after the summer. So obviously you shouldn't start your essays in year 11. You have much better ways to spend your time. But I was very resistant to writing my essays over the summer. Essays in your last 3 months of applying to college, and they are probably the component of your application that take the least time, but they carry the most weight, kind of commensurate to how much time you spent on them. So please, please, please write your essays. And if if the situation gets better, you can use this time now to write your essays, and then you can use that time to add to your resume or add any finishing touches, and that's a much more logical way to spend your time. The next thing I'm going to talk about is tailoring your application for specific universities. So a lot of you will be applying to universities that are very, very different. I'll give you an example. So the main two reach schools that I applied to was Princeton, which I applied restrictive early action, and MIT, which I'm going to. And I had very different applications for both of them. I got into both, and my applications, you would think they were off, two different people because I did completely different things. So when you're kind of trying to tailor an application to a specific university, especially you're applying to early because you can really focus on it, the first thing you can do is read acceptance students' essays. So you often get a flavor of what they're looking for by reading acceptance students' essays of the specific university you're going to apply to. Obviously, people will be very different, and each university will accept a very different range of people, but you can kind of see like commonalities if you really look for them with acceptance students' essays. The next thing you can do is get a feel for the ethos of the university. What I mean by ethos is what the most popular majors are, what they value, what their motto is. Because if you kind of look at that and see if your personal values align, that's something that's really helpful. And that's something I did with MIT. Actually, because MIT has always been really known for furthering education. They've made things like Scratch, they've made things like MIT App Inventor that make education very accessible to the general public. And all MIT courses by kind of a whole school effort are available on YouTube for anyone to watch. So they're very into making their education, the classes they offer, available to the public. And they founded EDX as well. I think they did it with Harvard, but they were a co-founder of EDX. And I realized that I also had an interest in education. So I wrote a whole essay about education because I was like, oh, this is something that I feel very strongly about, and an area in which both of us align. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is don't feel the need to fit this ethos exactly. So a lot of people, when they think about MIT especially, they think about people coding all the time and people doing maths. And my application wasn't centered on that at all. Obviously, I had kind of a strong STEM background, and I still did include that, especially in my maker portfolio, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But I also included an art portfolio. And it's something I think really helped me stand out, because I don't think a lot of people submit art portfolios at all. And it's something that you can just do to say, oh, I'm not like everyone else that's applying in my major. So if you can kind of see what activities everyone's doing in your major and do all of those activities, but then do something a little bit extra. So if you're, say, applying for economics or political science, a lot of those things. But if you have something that kind of comes out of left field, like music or sports, that you really get into, that's something that's really helpful, and it will make you stand out a little bit. I'll talk about both of my applications and how I approach them. So my extra essay was actually about a quote, and it was also inspired by this Princeton professor that actually published a resume of his failures. So internships he didn't get, positions he didn't get, and it kind of went viral if you want to look for it. So I wrote an entire essay inspired by that, and I said it was inspired by that, where I kind of showcased all of my failures. So again, you don't have to present yourself as the most polished individual when you're applying to college. But a very important side note is that I kind of use these failures to present me in a positive light. So I presented myself that as someone that tries everything and doesn't have hang-ups about trying new things. And a lot of those things fail, and that's okay. But I did use that essay to make myself, to paint myself in a positive light. Like, you should never kind of actively try to make yourself seem like a terrible human being when you're applying to college, obviously. But you shouldn't be afraid to kind of break the facade, because a lot of people seem very polished in their applications, and they see a lot of that. So if you can do something that breaks the mold and shows this kind of vitality and curiosity, that's something that's really helpful. Next, I had to write an engineering essay. I had to write many essays for Princeton and MIT. I'm just kind of talking about highlights. I had to write an engineering essay. So I wrote my essay about my relationship with engineering and electrical engineering, because I applied to Princeton for electrical engineering. I talked about my relationship with that through electrical laws. So like me learning kind of V equals I, or Ohm's law, me learning Kirchhoff's law, all of these kind of electrical like cornerstones. I kind of talked about my relationship with each of them, and I turned each one of them into a metaphor. And that's a really nerdy essay, and that's not necessarily one I would send to MIT. But I thought Princeton has a very high concentration of both humanities and STEM majors. So I wanted to present an application that has that interdisciplinary feel. And I obviously submitted my art portfolio. And MIT, I did education, I did art. And something that is very special about MIT is that it has a maker portfolio. And I had a lot of things that I could show better than I could speak about. So I documented each of them. I took videos and pictures of each of them. And very last minute, I sent in a maker portfolio. And I think this was the thing that really helped my application, because not that many people send in maker portfolios. And if you can, that's something that they really look favorably upon. And having this kind of really eclectic set of interests helps, because MIT is really weird with admitting international students. Actually, it has a cap on international students, and the acceptance rate is usually hovers around 1.5%. And a big majority of these people are people that have done the International Maths Olympiad and all these crazy Olympiads. And I wasn't one of these people. And chances are you won't be one of these people. So you can either be someone that fits the mold and be the absolute best at that, or you can do something that's completely different and hope that gets you accepted. And that's kind of the approach I took. The next thing I'm going to talk about is pulling together an unfocused resume, because until a few months ago, I kind of did a little bit of everything and I didn't have a clear focus. So ideally 10 months before you start your college applications. If it's slightly, after that, that's fine. But I did it 10 months before. list everything you've done in life, just list absolutely everything, and find commonalities between those things that aren't so obvious. So this is kind of what that looks like for me. So I was interested in computer science. I was interested in animation. I was interested in public speaking. I was interested in art. But I've realized that I used all of these to teach in some way. So I've done a lot of computer science teaching. I use my animations to teach. I've done public speaking teaching, hosted like workshops and things. So I realized that all of the things I did were kind of used to educate people in some way. So that was the commonality I had. The commonality will be different for all of you, but if you can find that, then you can really focus on the commonality as well and make that a component and make that the thing that makes everything make sense. And chances are you will have that because people naturally gravitate to different things. So I'd encourage you to find that. Then group all of your activities together into ideally 8 groups. So the Common App actually has 10 spaces for your activities, but you can use 2 of them for internships, you can use 2 of them for whatever. I'd say group everything into 8 groups, and then you can develop each group. So if one group is kind of a little sparse, then you can kind of make that group stronger, because remember, you can do a million things, but there's only 10 spaces on your Common App. So you really have to lump things together like I did with public speaking and economics and World Scholars Cup. All of them have like a speaking component, a humanities component. So I just decided to lump them all together because there wasn't enough space. So I made that all into one. I just made that into one thing that I headed public speaking. So that's what you can do to pull together an unfocused resume. Now, the last thing I'll talk about is managing social challenges when you're applying to college. So some of you, if you're in 6th form or in your last couple years of school, might have already experienced this, but everyone is trying to apply to college at the same time, and everyone's trying to, apply to very similar colleges at the same time. So there is a toxic culture that develops in a lot of schools, I'm not going to lie. And a lot of people find that disheartening. And a lot of the time it distracts from what you're doing, which is trying to apply to college. I'll give you an example of something that's really funny that happened when I was in the 6th form. So one set of people kind of created STEM Club. And then another set of people created STEM Council. And then another set of people created STEM Talks. And then another set of people created STEM Society. And if you're an admissions officer and you get an application from 4 of these people that all have the same thing on them, what are you going to think? Oh, there's nothing to differentiate them. Let me render all of this null and void and let me focus on something else. So it's not worth it to replicate someone else's profile. In fact, if you see someone creating STEM Club, unless you have something wildly different to add to the conversation, just stay away from that altogether and find something else. Find your specific niche that you can fill, something that no one else has done. So please do not try to do copycat things just because you're kind of anxious that someone has something on their resume and you don't. It is not worth it, trust me. The next thing I'm going to say is do not try something you aren't good at. So I'll give an example from me. So this app that I created, I didn't actually market it at all. All I did was kind of go into dyslexic institutes and have some of these children try this app. And some of them are using it right now, but I didn't market it to the wider world. I didn't kind of create press releases for this or anything. I kept it kind of something that was just limited to the institutes. And a lot of other people were creating apps that they were kind of marketing and getting the whole world to use. And like, I could be insecure about this and try to market it to the wider world, but I know I'm not good at that kind of thing. So I just tried to make the app and make it to a very high standard. That was what I was good at. So I tried to kind of leverage what I was good at, leverage what I thought I could do better than anyone else. Because ultimately, if you try to do something that someone else is good at and you're not, you're never going to do it as well as them. So if both of you try to put it on your applications, theirs will always kind of be better than yours. So try to find something that you're good at, that you know that you can kind of do the best, that you can do, and try to kind of focus your application on that. And the last thing is have confidence in your resume. If you kind of decided that these are the 8 things I'm going to do, and these are the only 8 things I'm going to do, that's completely fine. Don't kind of get off track because of things that other people are doing, because it ultimately won't help you. You'll just kind of, again, it'll come across that you have a diluted resume, and this entire slide was trying to avoid that and make your resume more concentrated and focused. So that's the last thing I have to say. And this is the end of the presentation. So I hope you learned something, and I hope this was helpful for you.
Thank you so much, Dippy. That was an amazing presentation. So I think now we're going to open it up to the question and answer session. So I've got a few questions in already, but while we ask and while Dippy answers, please feel free to private message them to me on the Zoom private messaging. So the first question is that what would you do differently if you were to apply this time around? Obviously, your acceptances were amazing, so maybe there's not that much. But if anything, what would you do differently?
Well, I think I wouldn't I wouldn't take the SAT again. That's for sure. And I talked about this, but I would start my essays earlier because I'll tell you a funny little story. I did my entire MIT application in 2 days, which I shouldn't have done. I focused on my early applications, but then my regular applications, granted, I only had like a couple, but I kind of left my essays really last minute because you get essay fatigue when you're trying to write all your essays in 3 months. So if you can space that out, that'll be brilliant and that'll help you, because I squashed all of mine into a very, very small space of time. So yeah.
How did you decide upon MIT and Princeton being the places that you wanted to go?
Well, for my early applications, I decided on Princeton. That's because I was interested in a lot of things. I was interested in STEM, I was interested in the humanities, and Princeton is a school that focuses very, very deeply on that. It doesn't have like a very, very humanities identity, which say like Harvard has, and it doesn't have a really STEM identity, which funnily enough MIT has. But it was a school that's very, very interdisciplinary, and I looked at pictures of it. I liked the campus, I liked the professors there. I'd heard very good things about a Princeton education, so I decided to apply there early. And I also decided to apply to Princeton early because it was restrictive early action, so after I got in I could continue applying to a couple more universities if I wanted to, because I was very indecisive and I didn't really know where I wanted to go. So if I'd ED'd anywhere, like I would have been, and I'd gotten in, I would have always had that thought, like, what if I'd
Mhm,
been accepted to a university that suited me more? So with all of this in mind, I kind of applied to Princeton.
Interesting. So what did you do to prepare for the essays before the topics were released, the specific topics?
The thing with the essay topics is that you can really talk about anything and make it fit one of the essay topics. I wouldn't say start with one of the essay prompts and then try to develop your essay. Like I'd say go the other way around, because the Common App essay prompts, especially, you can really write about anything. In fact, that's one of the essay prompts. Like write about anything, title it whatever you want, show us whatever you have, and that's been an essay prompt for the last 3 years. So chances are it's here to stay. So it doesn't matter that the essay prompts weren't released, and anyway, they stay the same year to year. But what I did when I was kind of thinking of essays to write was I looked at a lot of people's essays and kind of figured out what essays I didn't like reading, what essays I liked reading. And that's the process that I talked about, a resume versus non-resume essays. And both can be successful, by the way. It's just kind of what resonates with you. What I did was I listed all of my interests and everything I could think about myself, like personality traits. Like the essay that I talked about Roald Dahl's The Witching Hour, it was all about me being a night owl and how like nighttime kind of gives me the confidence. It sounds really dumb, but I phrase it in a better way. But nighttime kind of gives me the confidence to try things that I usually wouldn't try, and it's where a lot of my experimentation and building stuff happens, because that was something that was very true to my life. Like all of the building I did, all of the art that I did like at night. But I don't know why. It's just kind of how it worked out. I did kind of like between the hours of like 12 and 4 a.m. So I just write down personality traits and see if there's something that links those two, or something that seems interesting and something that you don't think a lot of people will write about. And that's what you should really focus on.
Were there any opportunities as such that you felt you missed out on because you were focused on something else or you didn't really go for it?
Um, I don't think I really missed out on many opportunities because I was very kind of like I was really unbothered with whatever else was going on with the world when I was applying to college. I'm like, yeah, I'm doing my stuff. Like these opportunities can come my way, but like I'm doing my stuff and I'm happy with that. So one thing I do not regret about my college application process is, what I focused on. I don't think there's anything more I could have added to my resume. Uh, that like perhaps my resume could be better, but there's nothing I could have done that would have made me happier while I was applying to college. Because remember, like when I was doing all of this stuff, like college applications were in the back of my head, but also you're going to be miserable if you're not doing stuff you enjoy. So like I was primarily just doing stuff I liked.
Mhm. So, if you had to pick one thing that put you apart in your whole resume, that you think really drove it home that you were MIT and Princeton worthy, what would it be?
I think the thing on my resume, so like, I think my application was strong on a lot of fronts, but I think what definitely was the most unique was this animation thing. And it wasn't something that, I've always had like this undying passion for above everything else. I was interested in a lot of things, but it wasn't something that I'd seen that much of in the UAE. And it was something that was kind of unique. And it was something that kind of, merged my artistic skills and my technical skills. Like the animations that I did, if I can kind of go to the right slide, like the app that I did actually required a lot of coding that you can't really see. Embedding the animations in, it required a lot of technical knowledge. So I think that's something that really set me apart, because it's not, the basic fields of art and technology. It's something interdisciplinary, which isn't that common in this part of the world, at least.
Mhm, mhm. So how did you deal with the interview section, and what did you get any interviews for them?
Yes, I did. So I did a Princeton interview that I think was the only interview I did, if I believe. Yeah. That was the only interview I did. And I was horribly unprepared for my Princeton interview. My interviewer was a very lax guy. So a lot of people say that when you go to interviews, like, prepare answers to all of these questions. I saw a lot of my friends taking printouts and memorizing what was on the printouts to go to interviews. I didn't do any of that, to be honest. Like, I just kind of had a mental note of stuff that I kind of touched on my application, but maybe I wanted to say more about, but I didn't really prepare anything. And my interviewer was a really lax guy. He was like, let's just talk. And he didn't really ask me any specific questions. He was like, so what do you want me to, what do you want me to put on my report? Because every interviewer puts out a report of the candidate that they interview. And they, like that, it can be an opportunity for you to talk about something that you kind of touched on in your application, but you would like to give a bit more attention. And yeah, that's all I'll say. And interviews, really, I don't know how much they matter. Like, I I don't know. I really don't know how much they matter, because I've heard in a lot of places they're just for a way for alumni. They're just a way for alumni to kind of keep in touch and keep a relationship with the university they're interviewing for. So it's more about the alumnus than you. And you can have a horrible interview and not get in. You can have a horrible interview and get in. That's what I meant. You can have an amazing interview and not get in. I know a lot of people who didn't get interviews for their colleges but still got in. Like the vast majority of my colleges, except Princeton, I got in without having an interview. So, and another thing I'll say is there'll be a lot of like hullabaloo over who gets an interview and who doesn't, and whether that indicates that someone's getting in and someone's not. I know people from DC who got an interview and I didn't, and I got into MIT and they didn't. So like, and it's like the other way around for, it's the other way around, obviously, for a lot of people as well. So like, try not to look too much into interviews. It's a tiny bit of the process. Don't stress about it. Don't stress about anything, in fact, but yeah, don't stress about interviews especially.
Mhm. So I think we're gonna have one final question to wrap up the session. Otherwise, we could keep this going on forever. But if you could give only one piece of advice to everyone in year 11 who's about to start their journey into year 12 and year 13, what would it be?
If I could give you one piece of advice, is kind of something I mean, I'll step away from what I've been echoing this entire presentation. Figure out what you're interested in, develop those. Don't worry about anyone else. If I had to give a different piece of advice, I would say that with everything you do, try to add a level of sincerity to it. So what I mean by that is that a lot of it depends on kind of what the profile you're trying to put forth, obviously, but a lot of people's college applications, you read them and they don't seem like human beings. Like they're trying to kind of throw in your face every way in which they're impressive. And like, yes, people are impressive, and you know, like if you're thinking this deeply about applying to university, you'll probably be a very impressive individual. But you can kind of showcase just your little quirks and what you're like as a person. It's not a waste of application space to talk about your personality, because again, MIT specifically has a lot of people that are technically brilliant applying there, but a lot of them do, you know, in their applications, like, don't come across as humans. They don't talk about themselves, and you don't kind of get a sense of what they are as human beings apart from their accomplishments. So like, I would say, you know, and this sounds like something that you can leave really late on for your essays, but even when you're in year 11, like, please do things outside of college applications, like read things that aren't related to your major or what you're applying for. Read for fun, do things for pleasure, because those are the tiny little things that'll come out in your college application that you kind of wouldn't expect. And you know, and it's not going to make you any worse of an applicant. In fact, it'll give you an edge, like, because everyone is doing just the most, you know, for college applications. But try to develop your interests outside of just how they look on a college application. So that's what I'd say.
Thank you so much, Dippy, and thank you so much to everyone who came for the session. I hope everyone got out of it as much as I did. So yeah, I think that's it. Tune in next week, same time, for another session about how to get into water. Thank you, everybody.